Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Cover to Cover. I'm your co-host for today, Beth Eun-hee Hong.
And I'm Naomi Ng.
To commemorate International Women's Day and our podcast's 1-year anniversary, we have today a very special guest. We have Hawon Jung, author of Flowers of Fire, about South Korea's feminist movement and its implications for women's rights around the world.
Hawon is joining us from Stuttgart, Germany. She was an AFP correspondent in Korea with over a decade of experience covering the two Koreas, K-pop's rise, and the MeToo movement, for which she was shortlisted in the 2019 awards for editorial excellence by the Society of Publishers in Asia. She is currently working as a freelance journalist. Welcome, Hawon, to the Cover to Cover podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
We're really excited that you've joined us for this episode, and we love the book. And our biggest question was, what initially propelled you to write this book in the first place?
I would say there was no particular moment that made me want to write this book. It was more like a very gradual process that happened over several years while I was working at the AFP and covering women's rights issues back then. And for those who don't know who are not very familiar with what happened in South Korea has gone through a very powerful wave of feminist movement for the last few years, more specifically since mid to late 2010s. For instance, South Korea had experienced what I think is arguably the most successful and robust case of MeToo movement, starting in 2018. And on the same year, we also had the tens of thousands of women taking to the street of Seoul for several months, actually almost throughout the year, every month, to condemn this culture of what is widely known as spy cam porn, and also to call for tougher punishment against such crimes by the government. And we also, at the same time, had this successful campaign to decriminalize abortion. And so there were a lot of there was this very big outburst of feminist activism that all happened all at the same time through 2018 onward. And I thought that this might be something, worth writing a book about. If you see a lot of people outside Korea, the kind of audience that I was writing stories for, they often see South Korea through a very limited scope of topics, like the geopolitics with North Korea, Kim Jong-un, military confrontations between the two Koreas, or let's say technology stories involving Samsung, or just generally the South Korean pop culture like K-pop or K-dramas. But if you see the situation on the ground and to see the lives of ordinary South Koreans, I think gender is really one of the key topics that have dominated the conversations among the ordinary South Koreans for the past few years, whether it was, say, conversations in school classrooms, corporate offices, government, news media, online chat rooms, or even the conversations over the family dinner tables. And that also led to a lot of dramatic shift in the country's gender dynamics as well. So I thought that this might be something that a lot of people outside Korea who are interested in Korea might want to read about. And this is not a book about the usual topics like North Korea, Samsung, or K-pop. But if you are interested to know more about these usual topics that are discussed on the international level, and get to know more about the ordinary lives of ordinary South Koreans and what they go through, especially women, and I think a book like this might be necessary, and this might be a very interesting read for the people like them.
Yeah, and that's actually so important that you are, recording all of the historical developments that have happened here in South Korea over the last few years. It's actually, shocking to think that a lot of this has happened really in the like less than 10 years, right? Over the course of 10 years, I mean, it's kind of dizzying, the space, the pace. And speaking of, the local elements of this book, flowers are a recurring motif, including in the title, Flowers of Fire. So can you explain to our listeners how you came to choose this motif and the title?
Yeah, sure. I think when I was trying to come up with the title of this book, I thought somehow flower is a very good metaphor to sum up the struggles these women described in the book were having. Like flower is a metaphor often used to describe women in South Korea and perhaps in other parts of the world. It kind of considers, in a lot of cases, used as a compliment to, praise women's appearance. Of course, it's sexist, but, used in a lot of countries, I guess. And in Korea, it is, I would say it's a global metaphor for women and the way society looks at women as a sort of a, pretty sexual object to be seen but not to be heard. And in cases of South Korea, let's say the word flower is used in a lot of social settings. For instance, when, in workplaces, for instance, women, especially young women, can be sidelined from, promotion opportunities or in business meetings. But when there is, say, the business lunch or so-called 회식, the after-hour drinking session that are very, popular and common in South Korean workplaces. What happens a lot of times is that young women are kind of nudged to sit next to the most powerful or most senior figure on the table with this tacit obligation to, brighten up the mood, basically pouring drinks for this man or having a little bit of pleasant chit-chat, or demurely laughing or smiling at whatever jokes he makes. In a lot of cases, the jokes almost inevitably include the remarks like, "Oh, I'm very honored. I'm very happy to be surrounded by many flowers." But at the same time, when I was covering a lot of street protests in support of women's rights issues, most notably back in 2018 at the anti-spy camp protests that happened for so many months, one of the most popular slogans the protesters were chanting together was, "We are flames, not flowers." And the South Korean word for flame is literally called 불꽃, fire flower, or flowers of fire. And when I heard that slogan, I thought it was a pretty nice metaphor of what these women are, how society views women, but at the same time, how these women are fighting, to sort of burn down the system of patriarchy. So that's how I came up with this title, Flowers of Fire, to basically sum up some of the struggles of these women described in this book.
Beth and I both agree that Flowers of Fire is a great title. Other than in the title itself, in the book there are other instances and references to the word flower, and especially in part 1 when you talk about South Korea's MeToo movement, we see the word flower snake or 꽃뱀 come up numerous times. For listeners who are encountering this term for the first time, what does it mean, and is it still relevant in Korean society today as it was in 2018?
Yeah, sure. 꽃뱀 or flower snake is a very common pejorative slang term that refers to women who use their sexual appeal to financially exploit men. But that term is actually used a lot more commonly used to describe or attack or label sexual assault victims who come forward. And what I was covering the Me Too movement back in 2018 onward, this word has been, when you see the news articles about any kind of allegations of sexual misconduct against powerful men, This word almost mistakenly appear in a lot of the best recommended comments on, you say, Naver or Daum or this portal news sites that South Koreans read news and leave comment on. And this slang term is, I would say, it serves as a very powerful kind of bubble punch to drive a lot of sexual assault victims into silence. And as a matter of fact, a lot of sexual assault victims I talked to said this word, flower snake, is being labeled as a flower snake was one of their biggest fears that prevented them from coming forward. And even if they managed to come forward and hold their abusers accountable in court, a lot of victims say that I'm not going to seek financial compensation. I'm not going to see any money out of my abuser because of the sheer fear of being labeled as a flower snake and, being accused that basically, oh, you did everything just to get money. So it kind of goes on to show how powerful this slang term, what kind of power this slang term has to prevent the sexual assault victims in South Korea from coming forward. Although that's only a tip of the iceberg, a lot of re-victimization these women face after they came forward. But I think that this slang term is still very widely used in South Korea. But what has changed for the past couple of years is that the attitude of women or attitude of sexual assault victims, that I think the way they see it is that even though the attacks or the re-victimization of sexual assault victims who speak out is still quite rampant and widespread, also at the same time there is this sense among many women that when they speak out, when they come forward, there's a greater chance that their voices will be heard, they will be listened to, and they will be supported by women who might just rally behind them, which was the case in a lot of cases of MeToo the revelations that have come to light for the last few years. So there is this greater sense that the society is willing to listen, and even though there are a lot of people who might attack you, there might be also a lot of people who will rally behind you and support you and listen to you. And also, the momentum created by the MeToo movement for the last couple of years pushed a lot of companies or institutions to put in place a lot of measures or policies to how to respond to the complaints of sexual harassment or sexual assaults that happened within their organizations. Also, the government has enacted a lot of laws to how to better respond to such crimes. I mean, it's one thing that we have such laws in the law and in the book, and it's another thing that how thoroughly they enforce the law on the ground. But still, we have a lot of new laws that are in place that they can be used in the future, and I think that's a great progress. And I think the reminder of how the public attitude has changed over the society, how to look at sexual assault. That there was very interesting study that came out last year that after the MeToo movement in 2018, the depressive symptoms of women who had sexual assault in the past have decreased significantly. And the scholars who produced that study said it's because the changes in social attitude towards sexual assault victims, and because of the changes in social climate that in which the sexual assault victims might get more support and get a sense that they will be listened to, and they may not be stigmatized as they did in the past. So I think despite this attacks or re-victimization that still remain pretty pervasive in South Korean society, I think it's undeniable that we have made a lot of progress over the years.
Yeah, and that's actually really important. I think one thing I noticed in this book was that there was also progress. In addition, you were very clearly outlining the problems and like the deep-rooted issues, but you also highlighted a lot of things that have changed for the better. And that actually includes another endemic issue, which is digital sex crimes in Korea, in addition to sexual assault, which we just touched on, whether it be hidden spy cameras or online sex crime rings. One infamous case of such a ring was uncovered in late 2019. Many Koreans know they were known as Nbonbang or Nth-rooms. And operators of this ring blackmailed over 70 young women, many of them minors, into filming explicitly sexual content to be sold for profit on Telegram chat rooms. Can you talk a little bit about the climate here when it comes to digital sex crimes?
Sure. I think digital sex crimes was one of the focus of this latest wave of feminist movement by a lot of online-based young feminists, partly because these young women are major targets of such crimes. Digital sex, for those who don't know very well about what digital sex crime means, I think it's just a very term that loosely defines the sexual humiliation or abuse of women aided by technology, and also that mostly unfold in cyberspace. And the most common form of digital sex crimes in South Korea is what, as you mentioned, the so-called spy cam porn, and that refers to the act of secretly taking images, sexually humiliating or abusive images of women or people in general, actually, women and girls mostly, but women, and sharing those footages on the internet, in the cyberspace for, let's say, for profit or for entertainment. And digital sex crimes are really rampant in South Korea, so much so that more than 30% of sexual crimes reported in the country are actually digital sex crimes, a vast majority of them spy cam porn crimes. And these crimes have been happening in many aspects of our daily lives, whether in public transport like subway stations, buses, school classrooms, corporate offices, on the street, and most notoriously in public toilets in schools, workplaces, subway stations. And there have been a really big problem a problem in South Korean society for so long that a lot of women say they are afraid of going to the public toilets because they are so afraid of secretly being filmed by any chance. And what else? And the back to the Nth room, the scandal that you just mentioned. Another type of the digital sex crime that really came on the public light since 2020 is so-called sextortion. This refers to the act of using somebody's private information or private images to blackmail the person and to extract money, sexual favor, or more, the sexual images from that individual. And what came to the public light back in 2020 is that the two college student journalists uncovered this vast network of sextortion chat rooms that were thriving in Telegram. And what the operators of these sextortion chat rooms did was they somehow used the fake lucrative job offers to targeting young women or even minors and extract their personal data or slightly compromising or the sexual images from them, and then use them to blackmail them and to force them to perform many sexually degrading or even downright torture-like acts, and send those footages to these men so that they can share it on their own sextortion chat rooms with thousands of their clients for profit or just for entertainment. And it just kind of then after the case came into public light, it really kind of showed that to what extent the country's digital sex crimes have evolved over the years. Because even if you close one platform, then a lot of these voyeurs or criminals can move to another platform and go on to target more socially vulnerable people using various different ways. So I think as a result, somehow this feminist activism to fight against such crimes put the country on the, global forefront of the fight against such crimes, because digital sex crimes is really not the unique in South Korea. It is a global problem. I think you can name it in different ways. For instance, in the U.S., it's large crimes like this are usually called non-consensual pornography, or in countries like the UK, it is called image-based sexual abuse. The name might be different, but the essence of these crimes are more or less the same. The crimes that are aided by the technology and largely unfold in cyberspace, online platforms.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. This kind of, activity is present in any society. But in Korea especially, it is such prevalent issue. And even though tougher penalties were introduced after the Anthem case, we saw recently in the news, actually, a young man in his 20s was sentenced to 4 years in prison for running yet another Anthem, which echoes what you were saying, you close one down, but another opens up, which leads to the question, why do you think these cases keep cropping up? Is it because of blind spots or cracks in the law, or is it something more fundamental about Korean society and its culture and values?
I think it's the both of them. For instance, there have been a lot of criticism from women's rights advocates or legal experts about how the general leniency towards sexual the assault or sexual crimes in the South Korean courts or by the legal enforcement system. One of the most notorious case is the case of Son Jung-woo. He is a very young man who operated what is known as the largest pedophile video website in darknet, and he ran this vast network, this vast website for clients all across the world, and from South Korea to the U.S. to Germany, and thousands of videos showing children or even infants or toddlers being sexually abused were shared on his website and downloaded for a fee. And when the global investigation eventually tracked him down and he was arrested in South Korea and he stood trial. But in the first round of trial, he was only sentenced to a suspended jail term and was sent back home because the judge ruled that he was just a first-time offender. He was too young. And also he showed signs of remorse. He was apologizing. And for a lot of women, that was kind of the typical cases of South Korean law enforcement attitude towards sexual assault or sexual crimes in general. So, and apart from that, I think part of it has something to do with this patriarchal culture in South Korea that had changed relatively slowly compared to the economic or technological advances it has made. And one expert who studied South Korea's porn culture told me that it's like she described it as the wrong marriage between the slow-moving patriarchal culture and fast-moving technology. Because in case of South Korea, South Korea, nearly 100% of adult population has smartphones, and social media penetration rate or fast internet penetration rate is one of the fastest in the world. But at the same time, we have this patriarchal culture that sees women as sexual object, and the culture that relentlessly sexually objectify women. And this, if these two factors come together, then like this expert said, they can be a very rogue and dangerous marriage between patriarchal culture and technology. And I think that what happened in South Korea is basically the result of it.
Mm-hmm. It seems like, it inevitably it would take a lot of time and effort to actually really address these really deeply entrenched patriarchal values in South Korea. But in these last few years, you mentioned in your book that there is a growing number of women who are fed up with conforming to these outdated patriarchal values and gender roles. and identify as 비혼주의 or anti-marriage. Can you tell us a bit about this term and what kind of effects it's having not only on Korean society right now, but also its long-term effects?
Sure. I think this 비혼주의 or no marriage campaign is one of the several branches of feminist activism that kind of the emerged in recent years thanks to all this momentum created by the MeToo movement and feminist movement. And what these women who vow to stay single and childless is that this patriarchal society puts too much pressure on women, married women or working moms, and then we are fed up with this. We have no reason to enter into this institution that still remains so patriarchal and sexist, and we'd rather stay out of it and have our own lives and stay single. Just for the people who don't know the social context behind it, let me just explain a little more about why it's such a big issue in South Korea. South Korea has recorded the world's lowest fertility rates for the past 3 years, and now stands at below zero, which is really rarely reached globally. Now is the latest figure is 0.75. And the country's population is the aging and also shrinking very rapidly. And the country's 50 million population started to actually shrink in 2021, nearly a decade earlier than previously expected. And if you see the situation in South Korea, I mean, young South Koreans, whether men or women, they have so many reasons not to start a family. There is this the sky high housing prices. There is job unemployment woes affecting a lot of young South Koreans, and also there is this huge, enormous cost of child rearing, especially the private education. And also there is this very notoriously long working hour that practically makes it impossible to have a family life. But these women affect, both men and women, but somehow women are really leading this social phenomenon called marriage strike. If you see the surveys, and recent surveys after surveys shows that women are far more likely to reject the whole notion of marriage or childbirth than men. And in the latest survey, let's say 56% of young women of childbearing age say they don't want to get married, which was a lot higher than 43% among men. And also 65% of the childbearing age women also said that they don't want to give birth, which is also a lot higher than 48% recorded among men. And the mention that I kept mentioning marriages, that marriage and childbirth is so closely connected in South Korea. Because in this conservative society, marriage is considered the prerequisite for childbirth, and the birth out of wedlock is severely stigmatized. And those who give birth out of marriage, like unwed moms, are severely stigmatized and discriminated against. So I'll say the birth out of wedlock is only 3% of all the childbirths recorded in the country, which is a lot lower than more than 40% among the OECD member countries. And the reason the why women so shun this, shun this childbirth and the marriage itself is in a lot of survey they say it's because of the gender inequality deeply ingrained in the country's family and corporate lives. For instance, if you see in the typical South Korean families, the data shows that even in the double-income families, women spend more than 3 hours each day on household chores or childcare, which is a lot higher than the 54 minutes the women spend on such domestic duty each day. And what's worse, even the women who are the family breadwinners themselves still spend more time on such domestic duty than their stay-at-home husbands. And also under the country's familiar customs, usually women, once they marry, they are placed on the lower end of the pecking order of their husband's family. And in a lot of cases, they are relegated to kitchen drudge work for the rest of the family during a visit to their in-laws. And all these sexist cultures played a huge part making or driving a lot of young women to shun marriage or childbirth. And after all, these young women are the generation of the women who grew up watching their mothers shouldering this disproportionate burden of domestic duty and thinking, I'm not going to live like that. And to be fair, a lot of young men are also changing, and they don't want the view on marriage perhaps is much more evolved than compared to their father's generation. But I think the women's worldview has changed a lot faster than men's worldview about marriage, and there's this mismatch of expectation between these two sexes about what the typical marriage should look like and how the married partners should distribute or shoulder the duties of household chores and childcare. So that's one reason. And the second reason, at workplaces, there are so much rampant discrimination against working moms or married women, so much so that even the country's top maker of baby formula has been dogged by this criticism that it pressures female workers to quit or retire once they have a baby. So, taking all this together, you can see that why so many young women think that marriage is a bad deal for them. And even some of them, go so far as to declare this 4B movement, which roughly translates as a 4-no, basically no to marriage, no to childbirth, no to dating, and even no to sex. And these women who vowed the 4B campaign, I don't know how many of them are out there or whether they are really representative of all the women who stay single right now. And from the way I see it, not all the women who stay single, think that it's a political statement. But it's undeniable to see that, to see why so many young women, sort of boycott or intentionally or unintentionally boycott the notion of marriage and childbirth. And it's a big problem because South Korea's this birth rate crisis is an ongoing problem, and it's going to cause the shortage of young workers who can support the rapidly aging population, and also it's going to eventually undermine the vibrancy of the economy. And unless the government really acts very aggressively to tackle this patriarchal culture ingrained in the country's, family life or workplaces, I don't see any way that the country can boost the birth rate anytime soon. And perhaps the only other option that a lot of people can think of is immigration. But again, South Koreans generally have a very hostile towards the idea of immigration. And I just don't see any possibility that Korea can tackle this very deep-rooted the reluctance to accept foreigners inside the country. It's not going to be easy. So the country basically has two choices, whether to tackle the patriarchal culture or to tackle this sort of xenophobic people's xenophobic attitude towards the immigration. So I think it's going to be very interesting how the South Korean government or society in general to respond to that, whether they are going to accept this, embrace these changes demanded by women, or to change their attitude towards immigration, or drive itself to, extinction.
Yeah, that's actually all really, really, really so interesting that these conversations about marriage have happened in the last few years. And listeners who are fans of Korean literature may be familiar with Kim Ji-young, born 1982, which came out in 2016 and talked about a lot of what you discussed about, what does a woman have to sacrifice to be a married housewife? What kind of microaggressions do women encounter in Korean society? And it raised a lot of conversation about the word feminism in South Korea. But that being said, there were actually a lot of controversies about celebrities, female celebrities, even saying that they've read this book. And that goes back to feminism actually being quite a loaded word in Korean society. And can you just tell us a little bit about why that is? Why is feminism so loaded compared to other countries?
Sure. I think actually the feminism has been always a sort of dirty word in South Korean society for so long. Maybe it has become even more so after the mid to late 2010s when we had this new wave of feminist activism, especially among the young women. Partly because, since late 2010s, women have become more outspoken about the sexism or just in general cultural patriarchy than before. And also feminists became more visible in public spheres or in online conversations than before. So that kind of drew a certain level of resentment from men, especially young men, that they are victims of reverse discrimination, or they are now the victims of the zeitgeist, and the feminists have gone too far. And I think and as you mentioned that that kind of the anti-feminist backlash that has emerged for the last few years. So let's say female celebrities who bullied or attacked simply because they posted this picture of reading Kim Ji-young, born 1982, on social media, or simply just showing their smartphone case emblazoned with "girls can do anything." And I think part of the reason is that the perhaps at the center of this controversy is also this very controversial, now defunct feminist website called Megalia. And I would say it really helped it played a part in this new wave of feminist activism that emerged in the late 2010s. What they did, what a lot of members of this feminist website did was that they are basically reversing the gender it's called mirroring. And what the strategy did, what these women as part of the strategy was, they reversed the gender of a lot of misogynistic, derogatory slang terms targeting women from women to men. They just slightly tweaked these slang terms from women to men just to show how ridiculous and absurd it sounds, just simply by changing the subject of this slang of derogatory slang terms from women to men. And for those who don't know the background of the misogynistic slang terms flooding the South Korean space, it's been a big problem for as long as the internet existed in Korea. But since 2000, the late 2000s or early 2010s, we have seen this really a growing number of misogynistic slang terms created and popularized in a lot of online forums. Like, for example, say we have this flower snake. They label, sexual assault victims as some kind of vamp trying to extract money from men, or making false accusations out of personal grudge. We have so-called rag, supposed to clean towel, that describe women who have, single women who have sexual experience. We also have delisted women. Basically means older women over the age of 30, and in the minds of a lot of men, these older women, like delisted stocks, don't have any values. So that we have another, and also we have this slang term, even the attacking married women or moms, calling them mom roaches, for say allegedly inconveniencing other people in restaurants or stores with their unruly children. And the list goes on and on and on and on. And there have been a lot of frustration and resentment among a lot of young women on cyberspace that this is not fair. And this is really plays a lot of part to cementing a lot of gender stereotypes about women. And I think part of the what Meghalaya did was really a pushback against this rampant misogyny in South Korean cyberspace. But for a lot of general public, what Meghalaya did, or I think a lot of experts said it's kind of satire to make fun of all these misogynic slang terms and kind of push back against it. But for a lot of general public who didn't know the existence of these online misogynistic slang terms, these members of Meghalaya were seen as like hateful people who are spewing out all these hateful speeches or misandric words against men. And I think that kind of played a part. Part of it is quite unfair, I think, but still it played a part in this stigmatization of a lot of young feminists that became visible for the last few years. And also, like a lot of people in South Korea knew, since anti-feminism became really a big issue in South Korea since the presidential election last year, because the President Yoon Suk-yeol, during his presidential campaign, used this resentment towards feminism or feminists in general among young men to woo their votes, court their support. And I would say that was the first time that the anti-feminism was really sort of weaponized as a political cudgel for the first time in presidential election or political election of any kind. And after he took to power, I think that it had a lot of chilling impact on a lot of grassroots efforts to tackle gender inequality in everyday lives. And I think it became not just a cultural issue among young men and women, but became the wider political issue and social issue now. And I think it's a very disturbing and dangerous trend, and we really have to see how it will play out for the next few years.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in the West were surprised when, a country's elected president could be elected on such a platform. And especially, I think a lot of them might find it confusing and perplexing that, this is happening in the 21st century. And obviously there's a lot of media attention on it. But with your, personal experience and as well as talking to experts and scholars, do you think Korean society is as fractured along gender lines as it's portrayed in the media or as spun by politicians?
It's an interesting question. I think part of it is actually correct to a certain degree. If you see a lot of surveys, especially among young men, is this sense that they are the victims of zeitgeist or the reverse discrimination against men or feminist activism in general is pretty palpable. Men in their 20s, there was this survey done back in 2020 and 2019 showed the men and what they think about the feminist activism in general, like MeToo movement or no marriage movement or anti-Spacking protest. And surveys showed that those men in their 20s showed the lowest level of support for all this activism compared to the men in other age groups, even the men in their 50s or 60s. So and also if you see this Ipsos survey that was done in 2021, it also showed that South Korea has the highest level of gender conflict or gender tension among the more than 20 countries surveyed. So it is not I would say this, a certain part of the tension is real, And you might be able to feel it in everyday, lives of people, like in school classrooms, corporate offices, and etc. But I think the part of the problem now is that it has been spilled into the political arena and used by a lot of politicians, especially those in the right-wing party, to, as a political weapon, especially around election time and even after the election, just to keep this voter base among a lot of young male voters who have emerged as a kind of potent outer voter bloc for the last few years. And now it has a lot of, like I said, it has a lot of chilling impact across society now. For instance, most notably for those who don't know about what happened during the presidential election, let me just give a little more detail about what President Yoon Suk-yeol said or did during the campaign. He said the structural sexism no longer existed in South Korea. He also said he also promised the tougher punishment against those who make a false accusation of sexual assault, although such false accusation of sexual assault is considered to be less than 0.78% of all reports of sexual assault, according to the estimate based on state data. And most famously, or infamously, he also promised to dismantle the South Korea's gender equality ministry that had played a pivotal role in promoting women in society or to tackle gender violence targeting them. And after that, I think it's it'll be, you can see that how difficult it will be to talk about gender inequality when the head of the state in your country says the gender inequality, structural sexism no longer exists in the country. And you see a lot of sign of that for the last few years, months, for the past year. Like, for instance, since the government announced a plan to replace the gender equality ministry with a lower level office in charge of, say, along with gender equality, like family and population, and a lot of offices that were previously in charge handling the gender equality or policies for women kind of started to rebrand themselves into the offices handling children, population, family. And also the government decided to remove the term gender equality or any references to sexual minority from school textbooks. And also the government last year very famously cut funding for this youth program to fight everyday sexism. And the ruling, floor leader of Yoon's party also famously said if you find feminism or gender equality so important, then do it with your own time and money. So all of this gives signals to society that gender equality is something that we should care anymore, or perhaps this foster this hostility towards any efforts to promote women's rights or to fight gender inequality in our everyday lives. So it's a very concerning, disturbing, and I think South Korean feminists now have a lot, have a lot of fights in the road ahead.
Yeah, I can imagine. It seemed like in the past few years with the MeToo movement, there was so much progress. There was so much progress that they made, and now with a new president, it sort of upended, a lot of things. And I can imagine Korean feminists would now, looking forward, have to sort of learn how to navigate a different strategy moving forward. How do you personally see, women's rights in Korea developing, and as well as its effects on other countries, especially in Asia?
I think, well, first, when it comes to South Korea, I mean, there are a lot of concerns, obviously, for the past year about where are we going and how how should we especially among feminists, that how should we respond to all of these disparage of attacks on feminism or the women's activism. And I would say, at least from the way I see it, I think not all is gloom and doom. For instance, even if you see the young men in their 20s who have really now portrayed by a lot of media as sort of really hostile to feminism and resentful of young women, I think if you see actual numbers, then I think there have been a lot of progress. Partly because a lot of values championed by feminists or have gone into have seeped into the conversations in everyday lives among South Koreans, whether they are aware of it or not. For instance, surveys show the young men in their 20s are more, compared to their father's generation, they reject a lot of traditional norms of masculinity than their father's generation. And these norms include that, it is essential for men to patronize, the sexual workers to forge male bonding, or it is essential to, go to arrange prostitution, to do business in the business settings. And also compared to their father's generation, they are more likely to embrace certain behaviors that were previously considered exclusively feminine, like cooking, cleaning, or even crying. So all of this show that although a lot of them said we hate feminism, the feminist values have no place in our lives, in our society, but it's just that they embrace these values without them even knowing it. And there was the young man, 30-year-old man who called himself feminist now. He used to be very resentful of feminism, but now he calls himself feminist. And he said, we are the generation of men who grew up next to these young women and, we studied and worked side by side next to these women. And it's impossible not to be influenced by the values they hold so dear. And it's bound to influence our behavior, no matter what we say. So I think this one sign of progress, although it's very cautious progress. I would say that with caution. And even in the family life, if you see the numbers, although the burden of domestic duty and childcare is disproportionately placed on women, if you see the married couples in their 20s, they are actually sharing these burdens almost equally. So that's another hopeful sign that we have. And apart from South Korea, if you see the cases of East Asia in general, what's interesting that I saw how in the women in the countries in Asia that share a lot of similar cultural values or cultural norms influenced each other and kind of express solidarity to each other. Like for instance, in China, I've noticed that the lot of young women, especially online-based, the feminists, now they came up with their own 4B movement, 4No movement against marriage, childbirth, dating, or even having heterosexual sex. And that came against this backdrop of South Chinese government trying to encourage more women to have child, to give birth, have a child, because they have also very similar, the birth rate crisis and also population crisis, far bigger magnitude than South Korea. Although they have this very oppressive government that is cracking down on feminist activism or civic activism in general, and sadly, the lot of online forums where these young women discuss this movement against 4B movement were shut down and cracked down. And if you see the case of Japan, also I talked to the one very famous feminist activist who organized the Japanese version of their own MeToo movement called Flower Demo or Flower Demonstration Against Sexism or Sexual Assault. And her name is Minori Kitahara, and she organized this the weekly protest or the monthly protest now to condemn the country's the legal system after a Japanese man who had sexually abused his daughter was acquitted in court because there was not enough evidence of physical assault or intimidation. under the country's very harsh and strict rape law. And she's told me that the South Korea's MeToo movement inspires her greatly, and especially the common slogans that were used in a lot of protests that were being held in South Korea back then. The slogan was "Me Too" and "With You," and it was meant to show support for those who came forward, to say that we are with you, we are behind you, we are listening to you, and we will come, we will fight with you. And she said that she was so impressed and inspired by that she used the same slogan for her own, flower demo in Japan. So all of this kind of showed that how women in those countries that kind of shared a lot of patriarchal values or misogynistic culture are influenced each other or find inspiration from each other.
Can I just jump in with this? Earlier, when you mentioned that especially young couples who are married, some of the men are increasingly taking more paternity leave. And I remember when I remember being surprised about how quite progressive the government's sort of policies are for parental leave. It's up to a year and a half, I think. Now it's changed to a year and a half, and it can also be taken by either parent, and it can be saved for as long as it's before they get into elementary school. They can decide to take 6 months off to just take care of the children. Although I think obviously it's mostly women in South Korea who are using all of it. But I was really surprised because in Hong Kong, the statutory maternity leave for women is 14 weeks. Of course, it's different for companies. Like each company, it varies by company. But the separate sort of legal paternity leave is 5 days. And that was increased from 2 days. So I thought, wow, Korea is really progressive in this aspect. And while Hong Kong is, 5 days of paternity leave, I thought that was, that was one thing that I just thought of when you were talking about those changes, that young men are now more willing to take paternity leave to take care of children.
One of the things about Korea is that things change very fast. It's a very dynamic country, and things that were utterly unimaginable only, let's say, 7 or 8 years ago you'll find it suddenly become very popular, very common. And paternity leave is one of the things. I mean, it was really considered just unimaginable, something unimaginable in a lot of South Korean workplaces until early 2010s. And there was this very aggressive push by the Gender Equality Ministry that encouraging paternity leave is really essential to eventually encourage women to give birth, because they know that they will be supported and they are not going to share the burden, the sole responsibility for childcare. So now the nearly 25% of all parental leave taken in South Korea are paternity leave. Still not a lot. It's underused. Of course, 75% of the parental leave is still maternity leave. But compared to only, 7 or 8 years ago, it's a great improvement. And I just hope that it will go up, even further down the road.
Yeah, it's really powerful to see how Korea's women's rights movement interacts with other countries and other movements in East Asia and beyond. I know you reference in your book how South Korean feminists are, inspired by, global feminism, like the movement on abortion in Poland, and also, the interactions between Japan and China. So it's really inspirational, actually, to read all of that. As we get to the end of our interview, I wanted to show you, I'm wearing a t-shirt that I actually rarely ever wear outside in Korea. It's I don't know if you can see it. I'm going to just show the camera. We should all be feminist. Yeah, so this is a t-shirt that I rarely wear outside because it's such a it's a loaded word, as we mentioned it before, but My final question for you today is, would you call yourself a feminist?
Yeah, sure. I'm a feminist. And I think this shouldn't be something so difficult or complicated, so fraught with so many problems. But I would say that if you oppose sexism or gender inequality, and if you believe that society and we all should work together to tackle sexism or gender, to work towards to achieve this society with gender equality, then you are a feminist. There is no difficult rules or complicated rules that the feminist should be this or that. As long as you agree to this simple statement, then you're a feminist. As simple as that.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Hawon, and for the very insightful conversation.
Thank you for having me.
We're filming this before the book's release, but it'll be out by the time this episode is uploaded on March 8th, International Women's Day. Hawon, can you tell our listeners and watchers where they can get a copy of your book and where else they can find you online?
Those in the US or other English-speaking countries, or where Amazon is available, you can find the book on Amazon or any other online books, a lot of other online bookstores where the books are available. And for those in South Korea, I think the book will be available in 24. Due to the supply chain problems, that might take a bit of time, maybe a couple of weeks until the book will be available in South Korea. But it will definitely be available in South Korea. So stay tuned.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I know you're also on Twitter, so we'll put your handle and all your website and all the details in the show notes. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your knowledge and insights with us. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, and anywhere you get your podcasts.
Please tweet us or leave us a comment about your favorite piece of work by a female author.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
저는 웹툰 원작인 오늘도 사랑스럽게라는 작품 재밌게 보고 있는데 이거 추천하고 싶어요. 이제 개라는, 제가 동물을 좋아해서 개라는 요소를 같이 접목한 작품들을 되게 많이 보는데 사람이 개로 변한다는 점에서 좀 신선한 느낌을 받아서 재밌게 보고 있는 것 같아요.
I'd recommend Nadine Gordimer. I recently read a collection of her short stories, and she was a really influential writer in South Africa, especially during the apartheid years. She wrote a lot about race and things to do with the political climate at the time. She was actually banned for many years, or her stories were at least. And yeah, I think she writes very beautifully and poetically, but also in a quite sarcastic and fun way, and I would definitely recommend her work.
I recommend this book written by Young, who also wrote the Shoko Smile. It's called 밝은 밥 in Korean. The reason why I liked it is because she talks about like 4 generations of like her mother, grandmother, and her great-grandmother. And this story reminded me of like how my grandma has lived her life. So it was a start where I got to really want to learn about grandma's like life before she became a mother, a grandmother. So it kind of was a kicker that started off the conversation with my grandma. So I think it's a good book to read about like women and family.
I would like to recommend Pachinko by Minjin Lee. She's a Korean American author. And I think a lot of people have already know this title because it's very popular, and also it's been adapted to Apple TV series. And the reason I like to recommend is it's very interesting and engaging. And I remember when I started the book, I couldn't put it down. Like it was very, it's a very thick book, but still the storyline, and it's very interesting. And also it follows a Korean family immigrating to Japan during the Japan's colonial rule of Korea in the 20th century. So it covers like the family dynamics and the the story of the family, but it's more about like a bigger story than the family itself. It's about Korea-Japan relations, struggles of Korean living in Japan during that time. So there were a lot of stories that I learned through history books, but I never really kind of thought what it was like for them as a family living there, kind of surviving there. So it was very, I learned a lot, and I would like to recommend for that reason. Yep.
Hello, my name is Hawon. I'm the author of Flowers of Fire, the inside story of South Korea's feminist movement and what it means for women's rights worldwide. In celebration of the International Women's Day, I would like to recommend a Korean language nonfiction book titled 우리가 명함이 없지 일을 안 했냐, which roughly translates, we may not have business cards, but we have never stopped working. The book was written by a team of journalists at South Korea's Gyeongyang newspaper, and it's based on a series of in-depth interviews with several working-class, middle-aged South Korean women, whose personal stories are often interwoven with the country's modern history as well. The book also sheds light on these working-class ladies' work and caregiving roles that have been often overlooked and undervalued in society. I found the stories of these seemingly ordinary but actually very extraordinary ajummas absolutely fascinating, and I hope you will feel the same way once you read the book. Thank you.